Hello and welcome back to Perspectives, bringing you our daily dose of news and views we hope are relevant to you. As the US government releases its extensive document on how it plans to tackle hate crime against communities like Sikhs, we report on how it's been received by the Sikh coalition. North of the border in Canada, it appears the community's huge political ally Justin Trudeau is in all sorts of trouble. And we have more detail on the Sikh security guard shot dead in Canada as tributes extend across the country. And Gurpatwant Singh Pannoon is at it again as he highlights in his own indefatigable way the growing concerns of Russia being roped in by India to also target Sikhs. All this and more on today's show. And joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our viewers out there. I saw a ton of comments come in after the last show, so keep it up. We love reading them. Thank you.
Indeed we do. And together, James and I will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And yes, we will be, as usual, taking a look at loads of your great comments at the end of the show, which have been filling up below the video. So thank you, as always, for those. Right, James, let's get the show on the road. What are you going to start us off with this morning?
Justin Trudeau has seen a bunch of chaos kick in across Canada as they were expecting Chrystia Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister. They were expecting her to step up and present the new budget going forward. And instead, she stepped up and resigned from her position. It appears that Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland have been at odds about how to handle the U.S. Threat of trade tariffs and other issues that have been going on. And last week it is reported that Mr. Trudeau had asked Chrystia Freeland to resign. She had been offered another cabinet position within government, but told him that she would take the weekend to basically take a deeper thought and pause as to where her future lies. And upon doing so, she came in today and issued a letter stating that she was no longer going to participate as a minister. She had lost confidence in the Prime Minister's agenda when it comes to handling the U.S. tariffs, when it comes to handling Donald Trump, and when it comes to handling other issues as to do with the federal budget. Now, the federal budget in Canada was expected to be coming in over $40 billion in deficit, and it actually came out over $60 billion. So that's over a 50% increase in the deficit of the budget that was definitely not seen coming this year. We knew that it was going to be higher, but when it came to the actual numbers, people were shocked. But more shockingly is the fact that Freeland herself has resigned. Now, moving forward, the other political parties, of course, Pierre Poilievre did not miss a beat in calling for Trudeau to resign. But surprisingly, actually, Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the National NDP party, also came to the same conclusion that it is time for change and it's time for Trudeau to step down. When Jagmeet Singh was asked by reporters and pressed on the issue about whether or not he would vote non-confidence in Trudeau at the next calling of that vote, he said that all cards are on the table. So it looks like Justin Trudeau is going to be forced out of office, and we're going to see some changes happening very quickly. With that said, Justin Trudeau's official response to the cabinet and to his own party upon the request of his resignation is that he will take a few days to consider his future and the future of the party. We don't expect that there will be any change before the new year, but it could happen very quickly come the end of the Christmas and New Year's holidays, Angus. It really looks like there's going to be a lot of change going on. Whether or not the voters are going to be supporting Pierre Poilievre, the Conservatives are way ahead in the polls. But when it comes for the rubber to hit the road, as they say, I don't know that he is going to get the vote. Excuse me. With the recent inquiry into foreign interference, we do know that there are a lot of accusations against the Conservative Party. So maybe the NDP and Jagmeet Singh will see an uptick in support and in voter support across the country, although they are in a very far third place when it comes to the recent polling, Angus.
Yes, again, I'm no expert in Canadian politics, but even over here, what's going on in Canada has actually reached even our mainstream news. And so obviously we've been taking a look at what's going on. I think the main concern really that's relevant to us is the loss of Justin Trudeau. And as I've often said, I'm no fan of Trudeau. Having said that, he has been an extraordinarily wonderful advocate for the Sikh community. He's actually had the guts to stand up, even to his own political cost. He has stood up for the rights of the Sikh community. He's been absolutely at the vanguard of the Five Eyes nations, pushing back on India, highlighting what India has been up to. The transnational repression, of course, Hardeep Singh Nijjar was murdered on Canadian soil, and he's really taken up that cause, and he's got that bit between the teeth, and he's been absolutely magnificent, I have to say, in how he's handled that whole affair. He really has shown some true, genuine courage and principles, and coming from somebody who's not a fan of Trudeau, that really is a really sincere compliment towards Trudeau. So I think losing Trudeau is actually, I think it will be a huge loss for the community. Having said that, politicians come and go. It's inevitable. He was never going to be there forever. His reign, let's call it, was always going to come to an end one day. It just so happens, like most politicians, it's sort of falling around his ears at the end of his reign. It seems to quite often go like that. So what really matters is what happens next. And it seems the pieces, certainly looking from afar at this side of the Atlantic, are in quite an interesting position because, of course, Pierre Poilievre himself, clearly no friend to the community, leading the Conservative Party. His track record, I think, does give us quite a large reason for concern about where he would take the nation and how he would represent the community going forward. But the real, I would say, the real interesting element, the real interesting piece in this game is Jagmeet Singh of the NDP. Now, he is a minority party, but minority parties quite often can hold the balance of power. And we've certainly seen it here in the UK. About 10 years ago, we had a coalition government essentially propped up by a very small minority party, and their influence was actually really quite significant. So could we see now Trudeau's support as it denudes, as it dissolves away? That support is going to go elsewhere. It's going to find homes in different parties. Now, of course, some of it may go to the right, to the Conservatives, but some of it may then move across to Jagmeet Singh's party, which might bolster his power, albeit he won't be in power, but he could hold the balance of power. He could be that small little weight that could just tip the scales one way or another, and that always comes with a price, and that price is, of course, his influence. So, James, I think we are entering very interesting times next year in Canadian politics. I think Jagmeet Singh has already held some level of influence on the government, clearly. And I think Poilievre, if indeed Poilievre survives what will happen over the coming 3 to 6 months and retains leadership, and in fact maybe potentially becomes Prime Minister, or whoever succeeds him, if that is the case, I think they will find that Jagmeet Singh, they may need to look at Jagmeet Singh as an ally to keep themselves in power. Who knows? But I do think it's interesting times. And of course, the catalyst behind a lot of this is Donald Trump. Yes, Trump still manages in his own belligerent, in his own incredible way, is almost disproportionate way. Even he is influencing Canadian politics in a massive way, because it was his threat of these enormous tariffs, these 25% tariffs. Now, of course, the US is the largest trading partner for Canada. So when Trump stands up and says, I will impose 25% tariffs on all imports from Canada, that is going to have an enormous impact on Canada and Canadian politics. And unfortunately, Trudeau, which of course, who sits on the opposite side of the political spectrum to Trump, of course, this is going to seriously hold Trudeau's whole stance below the waterline. And hence why I think we find ourselves in this position. Of course, Poilievre has jumped on that opportunity. So even Trump has had that influence. I do believe Trump's threats are, I think, just part of his negotiating tactic. We'll see if indeed he will impose these tariffs, but they have certainly been enough to weaken, or at least to pull out one of the key foundations of Trudeau's government. And I would say his building is collapsing around his ears, James. So let's watch it with interest.
Absolutely. Sorry, you blanked out there. We had a technical glitch, but yeah, absolutely. And for a woman, I mean, Chrystia Freeland's got big balls, and let's not forget that she stood up to Trump and she did not back down in 1 inch when it came to his previous stint in office in the U.S. And Chrystia Freeland stood toe to toe with him and did not back down. So, I mean, she has definitely proven herself within that position. And, it's sad to see her go. But again, I think it's time in Canadian politics to see some change and, just move forward. As it comes to the Canadian political scheme, we also have to take a look at where things lie, whether it's border issues, crime, and punishment. And that is a big issue right now as we turn the story to look at Mr. Harshandeep Singh, who was a young security guard, 3 days on the job in Edmonton, Angus. He was shot dead by a couple of individuals that were at the apartment block at which he was a security guard. Now, we did pay tribute to Mr. Singh last night, and I wanted to get further into the story because there are several failures of the system, the company, and the ownership of the building that led to the death of this young man. So a big issue in Canada, of course, looking at the political field, is that we want to see more law enforcement, we want to see better utilization of the court systems, and we want to see some bail reform. Now, going beyond that, we also have something in Canada that's called sentencing guidelines. Now, essentially, even though someone is charged and convicted of a serious crime or other crime, there are certain guidelines that the judiciary, the judges and such must utilize when sentencing the individual to whether it is probation, parole, and of course, incarceration. So depending on the depth of the crime, the level and severity, that makes a big difference. Now, this I bring up because of the fact that this young man was killed doing a job protecting an apartment block with retail at the bottom, and it was his third day as a security guard. This complex had a shooting incident only 2 weeks prior to him starting in this position. The apartment is in a more troubled area of the city of Edmonton, so therefore there should never have been a situation where a young new security guard is on his own in this situation. The employer, of course, was bidding on this job to provide security for the owner of the building. Several other security companies in Edmonton have come forward and said, yes, they recommended a minimum of 2 security guards, and one of the security companies suggested 2 security guards and a canine unit to do sweeps 10 times a day through the building and the property. The owner decided that it was in his best interest to save money and only wanted 1 security guard. And that is where the employer and the owner of the security company really failed this young man. He is new. He does not belong in a situation where there's been a previous shooting. The alleged shooter at that incident 2 weeks prior was not caught. Now you have other violent incidents and a bad part of town. You've got a lot of criminality happening within the units of the building, and you throw this inexperienced kid in there without any protection, without a bulletproof vest, without any type of actual defense mechanisms or equipment. Now, this is just negligence in terms of my opinion. The Edmonton Police Service did move fast and brought 2 people into custody on the charges of first-degree murder. Evan Rain, 30 years old, and Judith Salto, 30 years old. And as I said, they're charged with first-degree murder in the death of Mr. Singh. And here's an image of those 2 scumbags that did this. Now, let's take it even a step further. This Mr. Rain was previously charged with kidnapping, with weapons charges, and other offenses that were violent. He was given under a year of sentence in custody for those charges. He negotiated a plea deal that negated the actual weapons charges and negated it down to an unlawful confinement, I believe was the final outcome of that trial. The judge gave him time served, being almost 200 and some odd days of in custody. Now, the way it works in Canada generally is that if you are in custody awaiting for trial, you sit there for each day that you're in custody pre-trial, meaning before the trial takes place and sentencing, you get credit of 1.5 days time served for every 1 day you've served in custody. Now, if this individual is of Indigenous background, then they will do what's called a Gladot report or a Gladue report, and that essentially looks into their ancestry and their family background, taking into account whether or not there has been generational abuses or trauma, such as the residential schools in Canada way back when. But they actually take that into account on sentencing and can give them even further time off for such things. And this is something that Canadians are just newly coming aware of fairly recently, that this again gives priority treatment to certain individuals when it comes to committing crimes, including heinous acts of murder. And to me, that should be off the table. When it comes to violent offenses, repeat offenders, take all credits off the table, sentence them to the maximum penalty. Don't use the sentencing guidelines that are in place now. Revamp it. Give them the maximum. Make them do the time and stop coddling them. That is why this individual lost his life, because of the toothless actions of the justice system in Canada. And finally, where is the WorkSafe Alberta, also known as the Workers' Compensation Board? They are probably, and I haven't heard any confirmation, but they should be going in and investigating, because this is a workplace incident, a workplace death. Where are they when it comes to the preemptive areas? Whether or not this student is 20 years old and born in Canada, or a 20-year-old foreign student coming to Canada, or anybody else, there have to be regulations in place to protect young security guards. All Canadians should know their rights in the workplace to turn down unsafe positions, unsafe assignments, and unsafe environments. And that is where a lot of our foreign workers are not aware of their rights. And I think that that should be a mandatory program that they have to take before they come into Canada to work, to ensure their safety. And that's what it's all about. I don't want to see them being taken advantage of. I don't want to see them exploited. And I sure as hell don't want to see them in the headlines that they are being returned to their families in a pine box. Totally unnecessary, totally preventable in my opinion, Angus, and it just pisses me off.
Yeah, I think it's a very tragic story, this, as we said yesterday. It's an interesting insight, actually, into Canadian society. There are so many elements to this which highlight a lot of big issues. And weirdly, they are issues that are reflected certainly across the Atlantic to here in the UK. When you, as a parent, send your child, your young man, who previously was your child, to an overseas, what you expect to be a first world country, you don't expect them to, as you say, to end up shot dead in one of their first days at work. It's a terrible indictment of what's actually happening in Canada. And I say that absolutely hypocritically, because in fact we have this same issue here in the UK. The only difference, unfortunately for us here in the UK, is our gun laws are so tight that it's very, very unusual to actually have any murders perpetrated by the use of a gun. In fact, these days here it's actually by use of a knife, sadly. But the underlying issues are very, very similar. It is a terrible breakdown in society, in our first world societies, our supposedly first world societies, that are allowing things like this to happen. And it's absolutely horrifying that the root cause of this incident, or there are probably a couple of root causes. Firstly is the perpetrators. Why were they there in that situation allowed to do this? And secondly is, why was this young man in a situation that laid him open to be so vulnerable? Cost cutting. Yeah, here we go again. It's corporate cost cutting, which should never come in the way of safety. And we have very, very strong laws, certainly here in the UK, and I'm sure it'll be the same in Canada, of corporate responsibility. and it wouldn't surprise me if there is a legal case here for vicarious liabilities. It's called corporate manslaughter, essentially, that they did not protect this young man. They sent this young man in completely inexperienced, completely ill-equipped to face what actually he came up against on his own. It's a terrible indictment of essentially of that tableau of what happened. Likewise, the perpetrators. You showing up these photographs of these two perpetrators. I mean, I'm always loath to jump to judgments, but immediately you can take an immediate judgment and say, look, you probably can have a good idea of where these two people came from and their backgrounds, and they've been allowed to use and abuse the legal system. They've been let out early, and the price has been paid by a young man who's likewise contributed so much to his society. He's new in Canada. How does that society recompense him? They recompense him. They pay him back with the end of his life. It's absolutely tragic. And likewise, all this does, sadly, is it pushes people more and more to the right wing. The backlash in society is to demand action, is actually to push more people towards a right wing and a less liberal society. So all in all, James, no winners in this story. It's a very, very sad story.
Absolutely, Angus. And to keep in mind, too, that this building is currently, the owner is selling it for $7.9 million on the market currently. And, it's all about the greed. He's got a building that he has rented out, 36 residential units, and it's a fairly expensive market in Edmonton. You have 6 retail units on the ground floor that he brings revenue in, and he cannot take the extra $20 or $40 an hour after benefits and all the costs to make sure that this individual is safe and to provide the proper level of security for his building, for his tenants, and for the business owners. So it's just disgusting. And personally, I haven't got, a down payment to buy the building. But if there's somebody out there that is looking to buy it, I would encourage you to change the name of the building to honor this young man. Create a permanent memorial where his friends and others in the community can come and just pay their respects. And again, we talked about last night, kudos to the Edmonton Police Service for such a rapid response in putting these two in custody. And finally, to the first responders of Alberta, their professional association, who gave him full honors. And for the first time in their history, really brought him in as one of their own and gave him a full-fledged first responder memorial where over 250 people actually attended the event, Angus.
Yeah, so a fantastic response from the community.
That's
but
right.
Yeah, it's the root causes of that are really need examining. And as I say, they reflect so much of what is going wrong in so many Western societies at the moment. It really is an area of concern. Okay, well, let's move south of your border, James. Let's go into the United States. And recently, over the last few days, the US government has released a very lengthy, extensive document how to tackle hate crimes and how to tackle the targeting of their minority communities with all sorts of similar types of hate crimes.
Right.
And the Sikh Coalition has responded to the release of this document at length. It is a lengthy document. I can't pretend that I've read all 60-something pages of it. Very in-depth legal and governmental speak. It's pretty heavy going, to be honest. But I'm delighted to say the Sikh Coalition have actually been through it with a fine-tooth comb, and they've responded accordingly. And in fact, the Sikh Coalition themselves were heavily involved in contributing towards this. Of course, the US government, as they drafted this document, they did draw upon representatives from all the minority communities within the United States to tackle and to devise the strategies to essentially help these communities move forward. So the Sikh Coalition have published their response in a series of slides, beginning with where they say they react to this US national strategy to counter what they call Islamophobia and anti-Arab hate. And within that, of course, it does encompass the Sikh community as well.
Right.
So the stated goal of this strategy, as they say, following the national strategy to combat anti-Semitism, and of course this does follow a similar exercise where, of course, they were looking at the Jewish community and the rise of anti-Semitism. The goal was to describe and address the bias, the discrimination and the threats that Muslims, Arabs and Sikhs and other communities have long faced in the United States. And the coalition said that they were glad of the opportunity to submit recommendations for the strategy to the White House last year and have remained engaged throughout its formulation. So as I said, they've been heavily involved in contributing to the drafting of this document and this strategy. So they're delighted to say that several of these recommendations were ultimately adopted in the strategy, and these included lots and lots of different commitments, and they're all very, I would say, very arcane and very administrative in many ways. But the impact actually is actually very significant. So they re-established the Federal Partners in Bullying Prevention Interagency Working Group. Essentially, they're re-establishing a working group that will take a look at all these. Essentially, it's moving resources to take care of this. Of course, one of the key components of making anything happen is you need resources, human resources, and of course administrative resources. So it has actually been, they are now allocating money and resources to tackle this, which in itself is a very important step. Produce and disseminate a new resource to highlight best practices for religious accommodations in schools. So again, and the Sikh Coalition have been very heavily involved at an educational level across the United States. That they are heavily involved in schools and educational establishments all the way up to tertiary or university education, where they have helped disseminate and spread the knowledge and education about the Sikh community, what it's all about, what it represents, etc. So they're getting in there into the young generations to educate them as they grow up into what Sikhi is all about. Improve accessibility to the non-profit security grant program through language access and accommodations. So again, this is all about allowing the community access. It's helping the community get access to public grants, public money, essentially, to help grow their community, help protect their community, etc. Again, once again, it's all about getting the resources and getting the community access to public funds, to public resources to help the community essentially defend itself. And then finally, to continue to create accessible resources to inform community members of what to do if they believe they have experienced transnational oppression. So again, this is all about, it's about setting in place the system that allows the community, if they are subjected to hate crimes, if they are subjected to transnational oppression, or they are subjected to violence in whatever form, even however mild, that it's setting out a system that allows those crimes and those incidents to be reported, to be collated centrally, and therefore once they are collated centrally, then action can be taken about it against them. Essentially, it actually mirrors what's been happening here in the UK. It's a very administrative step, but it's a very necessary step to ensure that the community has access to a system to report such crimes, and these crimes are then held centrally so that they can be passed to law enforcement, to intelligence agencies, etc., so that that intelligence, that information is collected and can then be used to counteract it. So again, it's all very administrative in appearance, but in fact these are the necessary steps required so that all these problems can be then dealt with appropriately by the government. Now, it does move on to another area here, which is quite interesting. And they say it's impossible not to acknowledge, however, that calls from many in the Muslim civil rights ecosystem went unheeded in the strategy. So what they've said here, and there's quite a lot about this, and they're saying that, okay, well, thank you on behalf of the Sikh community, in that a lot of the issues of the Sikh community have been addressed in this document, is they're saying it's the Muslim community has actually not seen the same level of, I would say, of attention. Now, they said that one pressing issue among those that remained unaddressed is the spread of post-9/11 surveillance and counter-terrorism policies that disproportionately harm the Muslim community. And then they follow this to say another absent issue that, while not a matter of domestic policy, is inextricably linked to many Muslim Americans' current civic engagement is US policy vis-a-vis the ongoing genocidal violence in Gaza. And they say, we defer to Muslim civil rights organisations for further comment on these shortcomings, but acknowledge that they are serious omissions. Now, this is quite an interesting part of this, because I think first and foremost, it certainly reflects the very philosophy, the central philosophy of Sikhi, is that it's not all about us, it's all about all of us. In other words, we see everybody, our fellow human beings, as brothers and sisters in in our existence, it doesn't matter whether you're a Muslim, you're a Christian or whatever, is that we stand up for the rights of all communities, not just Sikhs. And I think this is very typical in a very benign way, how they are sharing their concerns, saying, thank you for looking after us, but our fellow human beings, our Muslims, you have not addressed their concerns to the same level, which I think it says an awful lot, actually, about how benign the community is. And it does, of course, draw in this whole Gaza situation. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole, because that is a whole discussion topic on its own. They continue to say that this public is one step of many that must be taken to recognise and address the hate and discrimination faced by Muslims and others in the United States, and our government must do more. Now, I would say, and I'll just go on a slight tangent here about the Islamic population. I'm going to play devil's advocate, as we say here, to some degree. And the United States government have a very, very difficult situation. And it is actually the same here in the UK and across Europe, in that we have very large Muslim populations. And the vast majority of that Muslim population that exists within our society are peace-loving people. They are peaceful people who go about their daily business like any of us do. But there is, without doubt, an extremist element, and it is this extremist element that are tarnishing everything for the rest of their own community. Yeah. And the governments in the West have this very difficult position of trying to target the extremists in the Islamic community without damaging the civil liberties, the basic rights of the rest of the community. And this is this very fine tightrope that the governments have to walk. And they have the same problem here in the UK, and I guess it's the same in Canada, James, is that there is no doubt that there is an extremist element within the Islamic community. Yeah. They do not represent the Islamic community, but they exist within the Islamic community. And the governments have this terrible dilemma of how do they target, how do they control, how do they surveil this extremist element without damaging the civil liberties of the rest of that community. Right. Now, the Sikh community does not, as far as I'm certainly aware, have this extremist element. Certainly, if it does exist, I've never seen it, and it is not obvious. And there's certainly, I would say, I've seen no evidence of terrorism or extremism, certainly here in the West, perpetrated by the Sikh community. So the Sikh community, it's very easy for the Sikh community to say, well, look, you're targeting the Islamic community. Actually, there is a genuine extremist element in the Islamic community, sadly, unfortunately, but it is a sad fact of life. That is why bombs go off here in the UK as they've happened. We've had dreadful terrorist incidents perpetrated by these mad extremists, sadly. That is what the government have to deal with. And that is why the US government, and as I said at the beginning of this, is the US government, so I'm playing devil's advocate here, because the US government do have a need to keep an eye and to try and control these. Essentially, they are the terrorists, they are the extremists that are causing a lot of problems. So I would say, in defence of the US government, as part of this document, that is probably why they have not gone to the same extent in terms of the Islamic community. So, but anyway, I'm sure our audience will have their own opinions of that, and they will let us know accordingly. And then finally, they say, ultimately, we welcome the principle behind the strategy and intend to use it as a tool in our advocacy. Our hope is that the Biden administration will meaningfully prioritise the fulfilment of the actions it has committed to in the strategy over the next several weeks. So yes, well done to the US government, a fantastic, they've listened to the community, they've listened to the Sikh community, and indeed to some degree the Islamic community, and they have brought in this very extensive, very powerful document. As I say, it's all very government speak, it's all very administrative appearing, but in fact it is extraordinarily powerful, and it will have a great and positive impact on our minority communities, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And let's not forget that, after 9/11, there was a lot of real racism and anger towards the Sikh community, the Hindu community, the Muslim community, and it was all misdirected when it came to certain nationalities, because it wasn't the Sikhs that were involved, but people. The ignorance is what really perpetrates the hate, the racism, and violent hate crimes. And so for them to take this bull by the horns and issue the opportunity to raise more awareness, to educate people, to give them the tools to understand. I think that's a huge step in terms of bringing racism to the forefront and helping to eliminate it, or at least reduce it greatly. And towards any community, that is a great first step. I think it's really jumping miles ahead. And the irony, Angus, is of course that they're bringing more education about the Sikh, about history, about culture into the schools in the system of the US, while India themselves is actually trying to bury it and remove it from schools from their own cultural and country's history.
Yeah, there's so many issues that we could get our teeth into on that subject, but in the purpose of time, let's move on to my second story, and I have to say we're moving on to one of my favourite characters in our community, and that is of course Govt Singh Panoon, who, yes, he has released yet another video, and he's in full form and in full flow, and I know our audience are quite divided about Govt Singh Panoon, but as I do quite often say, I believe that the movement has it does have a deliberate and an effective multilateral approach to how it pushes the Khalistan agenda forward. And of course, we have our very moderate voices, we have our very sensible voices, and then at the sharp end we have our firebrands, particularly in the form of Govt Singh Panoon. But I do always tend to sort of laugh about Govt, because his delivery tends to be very, as I keep saying, is a bit of a firebrand. It's very powerful rhetoric, and it's very excitable to watch. But he does actually always point to some very pertinent issues. He always does actually highlight some very important things. And his latest video actually does raise, I would say, a very concerning thing that has appeared. And his latest video talks about Russia. Now, we've often, James, on our channel, we've often talked about this alliance between Russia and India. And it does, of course, go back historically to at least 1947, when, of course, those historic ties were embedded when the KGB moved in, when the British moved out. The KGB filled that vacuum and helped to prop up the Indian government. And that, of course, that relationship has existed ever since. And of course, we've seen, even in recent times, Narendra Modi literally physically embracing Vladimir Putin in his recent visit. So, of course, we do know that those ties run deep. Now, Govt Singh Panoon, in his latest video, has talked about this relationship, and he's raised a very genuine and serious concern in his own inimitable way. Right. And he says, today, pro-Khalistan Sikhs seize the consulates of Russia. And I think when he says seize, I think it means protesting outside. I don't think he literally means seize the consulates. Well, I hope he hasn't. But they are essentially protesting outside the consulates of Russia and India in New York and Toronto, and raised Russia-India terror states and down with Putin Modi. So he talks about that since the assassination of Shahid Nijar and the murder for hire plot, of course, against himself, Prime Minister Modi, Foreign Minister Jaishankar, the Defence Minister Rajnath, and of course one of our nemesis, the National Security Advisor Ajit Doval, have visited Russia seeking support from President Putin against Khalistan advocacy in the United States, Canada and the European Union. Russia's Putin has now forged an alliance with Modi's India on transnational repression against pro-Khalistan Sikhs. Now, this is actually quite concerning. So, of course, we've talked about this historic alliance. Now, what Panoon is alleging is he now believes that Modi is leaning on Putin to assist him in transnational repression against the pro-Khalistan movement, against pro-Khalistan activists here in the West. And he's saying that Russian media platforms RT, India and Sputnik has started running a global disinformation campaign against the Khalistan referendum at the behest of the Modi regime. Now, of course, we've all seen for many years the Russian media platforms, these propaganda. I mean, if you want to see propaganda, then you really need to watch RT, Russia Today, and Sputnik. And actually, I have to say they are quite entertaining, but they're also, I have to say, very informative. But they are deeply pro-Russian government propaganda machines. But they always do make interesting reading and interesting watching. But what Panoon is now saying is that Modi has asked Putin, has influenced Putin to say, look, can you please use your propaganda outlets in the form of RT and Sputnik to spread more anti-Khalistan movement propaganda on these platforms as well. And these platforms do have a global reach. So he says that India has designated Vinay Quatra, he's the Indian ambassador in Washington, D.C., to coordinate with his counterparts, the Russian diplomats, and now Russian agencies have started providing intelligence and logistics to India's RAW, that's India's Research and Analysis Wing, and the National Security Agency against pro-Khalistan Sikhs. So again, this is a very concerning allegation, if true, that now Modi has asked Putin to lend assistance in the form of the FSB and, of course, the Russian diplomatic infrastructure to assist the Indian diplomatic infrastructure to, again, target Khalistan activists. Yeah. So we've long reported that we do know that India has been using its consulates and its diplomatic infrastructure to provide a platform to RAW and the NSA to go about their operations. And it is believed that the Nijar assassination and the attempted assassination against Govt Singh Panun himself, that they were launched on operations launched from consulates, the consular infrastructure within North America. Right. So what is now alleging is that Putin is assisting in this, is that Putin is lending his resources, his consulates, to allow these to form bases of operations for anti-Khalistan operations, anti-Khalistan activist operations. Again, a very concerning development, this. And Panun continues that India's face of Russia-India terror nexus, Vinay Quatra, he's the Indian diplomat, the Indian ambassador to Washington. He's saying that Vinay Quatra is already a target of pro-Khalistan Sikhs in America. So now he's saying that his supporters will now turn their attention onto the ambassador, the Indian ambassador. And he finalises his video saying that since Putin's Russia is now weaponizing Modi's India, pro-Khalistan Sikhs will target Russian consulates and diplomats in America, Canada, Italy, the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand, with demonstrations and rallies against Putin-Modi terror nexus. So what he's basically saying is, and I said the whole premise of this is actually concerning if true, he is saying that Modi is using his historic alliance with Russia to rope in Vladimir Putin and the resources, which are not inconsiderable. He's asking Putin to lend Modi his infrastructure and his resources to target the Khalistan movement. So this is concerning for the Khalistan movement, who not only at the moment have got Modi's India to worry about, that if true, they now need to look over their shoulders at Putin's infrastructure. If Putin uses his resources to target the Khalistan movement to help Modi, this is an area of huge concern. I'm sure if it's true that the Western intelligence agencies will now be looking very long and hard at what Russia are up to. Now, in reality, is this true? I don't know. If Panun's talking about it, he obviously has intelligence from somewhere that it's happening. If it is true, it is an area of huge concern. Personally, I think Putin's got a lot more to worry about. I think the Khalistan movement will be, I think, very low in terms of Putin's priorities. He might do it as a favour to his old ally in India. It will come as a quid pro quo. He will want something in return. Putin's a shrewd operator. If he's doing a favour to Modi, he will be saying to Modi, I need a favour off you in return. So that favour will not be small. Now we do know Modi has been financially supporting Putin for the Ukraine war. He's been buying Russian oil. But one wonders if this is true, what Putin is getting in return. And again, all it really points to, James, if it is true, it is just proving once again, if it doesn't need proving even more, is that Modi's India is moving more and more in alliance with Russia. It is moving further and further away from the West. Once again, highlighting the sad fact, the disappointing fact, that India is not, under the BJP, is not an ally of the West, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And, you've got sites like RT and Sputnik and several other propaganda stations out of the US, or channels, And they are, of course, banned in Canada. But again, anybody that's interested could always use VPNs, or there's ways around it with technology. There's always a go around. So, that is important to understand. And as you clearly stated, that there's a lot of favor going back and forth between the two world leaders, between China, between India, between Russia, between Iran. I mean, you can even expand that as to what other countries are going to be involved for Modi to really propagate and to push the narratives. And with the instability here in Canada, I mean, there are times when you hear Pierre Poilievre repeating the taglines that come out of the Indutva media. So, where are we going to look at in terms of that risk of the propaganda feed coming out from India? It's just really breaching all aspects of online discourse.
Yeah, and I think as the next sort of 30 to 50 years unfold, clearly Putin and Russia will be looking at India, knowing it is a future superpower. It's already had a strong alliance with China. It's probably looking at India thinking, fantastic, if we can get them in alliance, we're deeply embedded with them. They will be seducing and courting India with absolutely every resource that they can, because they know in 30 plus years, India will be one of the largest and most powerful nations on the planet. If they're in alliance with Russia will be delighted with that. And this, of course, should be of massive concern to the West, which indeed I'm sure it will be. So, yeah, interesting geopolitical element to this. So, okay, James, let us move on to our comment section. Loads of comments through for today. And I'm going to start with, in fact, it's a bit of a critics' corner, actually, but I wasn't going to label it as critics' corner just because
we love it.
It does actually refer to the interview I did with Dr. Sandhu, where we talked about how India has been in massive breach of United Nations conventions against human rights, and we of course had a lot of comments about that, and a lot of I would say pro-Modi, pro-India commenters waded in. Unsurprisingly, with their opinions, and quite strong opinions of many of them. Demon Trader said, waits for Pakistan Punjab to be claimed by these people, seeing as most of Punjab is under Islamic rule, not democratic secularism. Satluj, old chap. Well, Demon Trader, old chap. Yeah, it comes back to the same old argument. We've often talked about Punjab and the Pakistan. And the Punjab in the Pakistan is essentially, it is primarily Islamic, and that is a legacy of partition. So yeah, it is under Islamic rule, and unfortunately, that is, as I say, that is the byproduct of what happened in after partition. So when we talk about the Khalistan movement essentially focuses on the Indian side, because that is still primarily Sikh, or at least there is a very large Sikh population in Indian Punjab, no longer in Pakistan Punjab. So that's really what it's about. And democratic secularism, yeah, well, India is supposed to be a secular state. It is not a secular state. It's supposed to be written in the constitution that it is secular, but the Modi regime is most definitely not secular. It campaigned on a pro-Hindu ticket. So, oh dear, where to begin on that one, Demon Trader? So let's move on to the next one, which was Andy Singh. And Andy Singh has a right go at us, saying, stop this propaganda, they are lying. Well, are we, James? Are we really lying? I would say everything that we have reported is out there in the public domain. We're not lying. Right. It is evidence. It's so much of what we report and so much of what Dr. Sandhu said was not lies. It is a matter of absolute printed fact right across the world. Even in India, much of what he was saying is absolutely acknowledged. The breach of the human rights going on is a known fact. It is reported widely. If you think we're lying, then provide evidence to the contrary, James. That's what we always say.
Absolutely, and if we if we're giving opinion or hyperbole or anything, we actually clearly state that. If it is something that we are reporting on that we cannot verify, we are very upfront about it. And but for the most part, almost everything that we report is proven fact with evidence, and that's at the end of the day, that's what you're looking at, evidence.
Indeed it is, and so many of our critics call us, say we spout propaganda. Well, no, we're just spouting what we believe to be the truth, which is what the Govt media don't do. The Govt media have a very set agenda and a narrative. That is that is propaganda with an agenda behind it. Our only agenda is to get the truth out there. That's what we do. That is not propaganda. That's just reporting the truth and what we believe to be the truth. Now, Govt says, this is an interesting one, Hindustan Zindabad. And of course, this reflects Khalistan Zindabad, which we often say. That's right. Many of our commenters weighed in with Khalistan Zindabad. Well, Govt says Hindustan Zindabad. Absolutely, that is your democratic right to demand a separate Hindu state. If that is what you want, then Hindus in India have the absolute democratic right to push to secede as a Hindu Rashtra. And absolutely, I totally support your freedom of speech to say Hindustan Zindabad. That is not a criticism, that is freedom of speech, James. We can all shout for separate states of whatever we want. I would like a separate London, independent London. Why not? London Zindabad. But that is what you get in a democracy, James, is it not?
It certainly is. And I mean, you look at how the world has taken shape, the geopolitical, the geography in terms of borders. I mean, it's been evolving for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. And that's the beauty of it, is it's because the people decide what they want and they have that right to form their own nation when it comes to democracy.
And I would compare and contrast also Hindustan Zindabad with Khalistan Zindabad. Khalistan is all about multiculturalism. It might be a Sikh, essentially the modern version of the Sikh Empire, but it is designed as a democratic, multi-faith nation. Hindustan, which I assume, and I will be presumptuous to assume that what you're talking about in Hindustan is essentially a Hindu nation, primarily and exclusively for Hindus. That is what the Hindu Rashtra is all about, to the exclusion of other religions. So that is an interesting contrast there. Anyway, let us move on. Rama Seshan Ramathan, good heavens, whoever. India should declare this guy persona non grata. In other words, not welcome. Why? Why would India say that? I know why, is because they're afraid of the truth. And why should they? And this, if you want, if you think that India should declare this, then what you're saying is that India is afraid of the truth. I think this is a very sad indictment, James. If people should say that anybody who has the courage to stand up and speak the truth should be essentially thrown out of India, I think that's a pretty sad state of affairs.
Well, it sure goes against democracy, doesn't it?
It certainly does. So what you're saying is that you don't support democracy. And Tarwinder Singh comes in with a final one. He is talking all rubbish, James. I don't think we even need to respond to that one.
I can't see it up on the screen there, Angus. I'm not sure which one you...
I beg your pardon. Sorry, let me go for you.
My eyesight's good, but I can't see from Vancouver to London, my friend.
Right, let's move on to the next set. M. Verdi.
And I always say that, India's like a teenager. They're going through that identity crisis.
1930s Germany and the growth. Yeah, absolutely. And India, we've often said, and certainly many of my podcast guests have compared to what's going on in India today to what happens in 1930s Germany. And as M. Verdi says, most of us Indians don't know about what happened during that time. Absolutely, it was such an it was an interesting time from I would say a human development perspective. But it was certainly a terrible time. And the lessons that were learned, certainly in retrospect, because people didn't realise it was really like the proverbial boiling the lobster in the pot, is that the citizens of Germany did not realise what was happening before their very eyes until it was too late. That is the lesson that has been learned. And that is why people often compare what's going on in India now, is because many in India do not realise what is unfolding in your country until it will be too late for you to realise. By then it will be too late for you to do anything about, James. This has obviously been a lesson for so many generations since the Second World War, hasn't it?
Absolutely, Angus. And there's a new movie coming out. I don't know when, and it's called BAU Artist at War or Bow Artist at War. And it covers, it's almost like a continuation of the Schindler's List. So I think that that will be really an eye opener for people who don't know a lot about what happened in Germany during that regime to gain more of an insight from a very well done perspective. So again, it's yeah, we try to educate what we can, but by the wording there, I would hope they weren't insinuating that you and I have been around since the 30s, Angus.
I hope we don't look that old, James. Right, and then Mehwar Singh talks about the farmers' protests. Modi again sent to states government old farmers' black laws, as they're known, a new way to get farmers' land and destroy the market. And of course, he then refers to Modi's billionaire mates Adani and his friends. And of course, these black laws that he refers to, that Mehwar Singh refers to, of course, are these laws that Modi brought in, supposedly to modernise the country's agricultural system. And it was, and the defence of it that Modi came up with said that they were supposed to benefit the farmers by increasing their income and give them additional choices to sell their produce. In reality, it was actually an attempt to erode a long-standing minimum support price, the MSP mechanism for their crops. And what it essentially does, the outcome of it really is it just enables a few small, powerful corporations to take control of the agricultural sector. And Sikas BKOju says, oh, it's our old nemesis, Kangana Ranaut. And you claim that Kangana Ranaut is behind these atrocities. She openly said it in the Hindi media channels. Yes, indeed. So again, this is what the farmers' protests were all about, these dreadful laws that Modi's trying to bring about, that essentially is all about transferring wealth from the small farmer up to the corporate farmer, James. We've seen it unfolding, and actually we've seen it to some degree unfolding here in the West now.
Sure, absolutely. And I mean, that is something that was exposed with the Adani Group scandal as well, how much they've benefited from the Adani Agra business. So, you know, they are trying to force out the farmers. They are really pushing hard. But let's also keep in mind that when that toxic water gets into the soil and comes up into that crop, into those fields, it's going to be the corporate farmers that are able to wait the 10 years to remediate that land that has been turned so toxic.
Indeed, and Think and Unite comes back with a nice philosophical statement based on Sikh actually. No human is more valuable than another human. Absolutely right. But S. Baines comes in with an interesting riposte to this one, except in the caste system. Absolutely right. Of course, the caste system that structures Indian society under the Hindu system. Yeah, absolutely. Certainly, if you're at the top of the caste system, you're all right. If you're at the bottom system, if you're in the bottom layer like a Dalit, no, you're certainly not seen as equal, as we often report on the evils of Indian society. So, right, let's move on to our next page of comments. And this was a very long and interesting thread, and sadly we don't have time to go into it in detail. And I've only been able to just to pick out one or 2 points in this thread. It would turn into quite an extensive discussion, and I would say almost a heated discussion about the whole story of. Well, in fact, it covered many issues. And it started off with Vinod Damji, who said, does the Khalistan map show parts of Pakistan to be included? Of course, as we discussed at great length. Now, and this brought up a really pertinent point here. I don't understand why you're raising Hindu temples and the whole issue about Hindu temples. The fact of the matter is that the Congress Party were behind the 1984 riots. Riots didn't occur all over India against my Sikh brothers and sisters. So what have you got against Hindus? It wasn't them, it was the Congress Party. And then this, of course, then provoked a long discussion about the Hindus and the riots, etc. Now, Amritpal Singh came back and said, look, it was a genocide, not riots. It was actually a genocide.
That's right.
Just clarifying that point.
That's right.
After the Congress BJP came into power, not one of them delivered justice. So again, reinforcing this point that the Congress Party, who were one of the instigators behind that genocide, that once they got into power, they compounded their guilt by not actually bringing the perpetrators to justice. They continued to bury and to hide, to protect those perpetrators from the Congress Party, and they never saw justice. And many of them are still alive and free today. Now, Vinny Chauhan came back and said, of course, Khalistan map doesn't include Pakistan, Punjab, because they are armed and funded by Pakistan. Now, again, we talked about the whole Punjab, the Pakistan side of Khalistan. But what you're saying is they are armed and funded by Pakistan, the Khalistan movement. No, they are not. And even, and again, I don't want to go down this road, is this myth that's often trotted out by Hindutva, is that the Khalistan movement is funded by Pakistan and funded by the ISI, the intelligence agency. Right. It is not. It is absolutely not. We've talked about that at great length. We're not repeating it. And what you say is, even if they manage to get Khalistan, it will be Hindu majority. Well, it doesn't actually matter. And again, this comes back to what we said often, James, is that Khalistan is a multi-faith concept. Yes, it will be based on Sikh principles, but the nation will be multi-faith. It doesn't matter, even if it is a Hindu majority nation. That can be accommodated in the concept of Khalistan. And that proves what Khalistan is about. It is designed as a multi-faith. It will not be a theocracy. It will be a multi-faith nation. And then finally, to wrap up this thread, Janagra says, all you guys know how to lie. Pakistan is broke. Now, this comes back to this argument about Pakistan and the fact that they're funding the Khalistan movement. Right. Pakistan is broke. Indeed, right. Pakistan's finances are not healthy, so they certainly don't have spare money to promote the Khalistan movement. And Sikhs don't need money from anybody. Sikhs ruled the Punjab for 50 years, even though they were not in the majority. Hindus, Muslims and Sikhs lived in harmony. Maharaja gave money to everybody to look after the places of worship. It was the best empire ever. No one was hanged under his rule. 1 rupee was equal to 13 British pounds. In other words, it had a strong commercial infrastructure behind it. That's right. So again, I think Jan Agra really answers a lot of those questions. But I would say that whole thread was a fascinating thread. So thank you to all of you who contributed in that thread. It brought up so many pertinent issues, James. And I don't know if you've got any comments on many of those issues brought up there.
No, I think that the most important point you already touched on, and that was that Khalistan had a fair representation by all religious groups during the Sikh Empire, and that's where Khalistan would, again, I would see them as having a full, fair representation going forward. So that's why I'm so excited to see Khalistan formed, is because I think it's going to show the world what unity truly means, and fairness and equality. And to me, that's an exciting day when Khalistan is formed. So, again, it's about equal or fair representation by all people.
Absolutely. And then we couldn't have a show without Critics Corner. And I wanted to dedicate one whole page to Subhashis Biswas' comment. Who is funding this propaganda channel? Well, it's none of your business, but I think it's pretty obvious. Reported for promoting terror? Really, James? Are we promoting terror?
I didn't think my jokes were that bad.
I mean, we're often called comedians, but it's never extended to being terrorists. Well, by all means, Subhashis Biswas, report us to whoever you like. Exactly. I'm sure whoever you report us to will laugh and actually say, no, they're a bunch of comedians. And he says, go make Khalistan in Brampton. We love our Sikh brothers. Waheguru, Jai Shri Ram, etc., etc., Jai Govinda. So I think you betray your own ideas, your own ideology there in that final statement. But thank you nonetheless. And please feel free to report us. We live in a free nation. We live in a free country with free speech. And you can report anybody for anything if you so wish. But just don't be surprised if you get laughed in the face with that. So thank you anyway for your comment.
Well, and I think there's another important point to make there, Angus, and that is, where are we getting our funding? Well, we don't get a lot. So if you want to contribute, by all means, see the link tree in our description and our.
Absolutely, and I think you're absolutely right there, James, is that, and in fact, as many of you noticed, we have indeed been demonetized by YouTube, as have many similar channels to ours. Yes, India has got its claws into Google and YouTube. They have managed to close us down for very questionable reasons, and which means, yeah, we're struggling financially, but we do continue to bring this show on a daily basis because, you know, we're passionate about what we do, and it is so important to get the truth out there, to fight back against this oppression and persecution, this fight against free speech, which India is trying to extend out into the West. So all your support is massively appreciated. It is gratefully received. So if you are financially able to support us, please do. The link's in the description below. You can contribute. And if you own a company, or you know a company who would like to sponsor us, of course, we would be delighted to extend our support to your company as well. And of course, we're nearly at 22,000 subscribers on the channel. So of course, we do now have quite an extensive reach. So please do feel free. If you would like to sponsor our channel, we would be very appreciative of that. So on that note, let us move on, James, to our final set. And U-Core says, oh my God, as I like this video, the number's going down one instead of going up. There must be someone monkeying around. Absolutely, just following that theme. Yes, James, we always have noticed that there's all sorts of shenanigans, as I like to call it, going on. Is that, yes, our likes seem to go up and down fairly randomly. Comments disappear. Sometimes I do notice that our videos are throttled, as it's called, which means that the algorithm is very deliberately trying to hide some of our videos, and all very suspicious, I would say, James.
Absolutely, but not surprising, Angus.
Indeed, that is what we face. That is what we're up against. We are up against massive resources of India, massive financial resources that have a huge IT and online army that do fight people like us and do their best to try and restrict the truth coming out. So likewise, your support, whether it's leaving a comment, whether it's liking a video, even just watching a video, helps us. And certainly subscribing to our channel, it helps get this channel further out to a wider audience. And don't forget, in the real world out there, you can spread the word, tell people, friends of yours, tell people in your communities that you're Gurdwaras, that we exist, etc. Please tell people to watch the show, because it does help spread the word and get the truth out there to counter this terrible oppression coming out of India. And on a much lighter note, Manjit Kaur just says hello. And I do notice that Manjit very kindly on many of our videos always just drops in with a little hello and a hi and a good morning. So this is just to appreciate just that little hello from you, Manjit, and a hello back to you. Thank you for your continued support, James.
Absolutely. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on what time you're watching our videos at.
And the final comment of the day comes from Ragbir Bambra, who says, the next cricket match, love to see between Khalistan and India. It would be a great game to see. Absolutely. As a massive cricket fan, I would be in attendance of that very game. And of course, that game will be a very amicable game, I am sure, between Khalistan and India. I'm sure it'll be pretty tense because, of course, old rivalries. But as a cricket fan, I would be delighted to attend that game. In fact, I would be delighted to even audition for the Khalistan team, James. I don't know if you've ever played cricket.
To be honest with you, Angus, I've never seen a cricket match in my life. I would have to go and check it out. I don't know how exciting it is, but again, that's just, I've never seen one, and it's never been a huge thing in Canada, but it definitely in some areas it is, but just not in the circles I've been into, football, hockey, all that stuff. I like the fast paced, I like the physical contact, and, unfortunately they're taking fighting out of hockey, but I'm getting too old for it anyway.
Then all I would say, James, is if you haven't seen a cricket match, you have not lived. There is nothing more exciting than a 5-day test match. And certainly, we look forward to that day of a 5-day test match between Khalistan and India. But on that sporting note, we will, dry throat today. On that sporting note, we will draw things to a close for another day. Thank you so much for watching Perspectives. Don't forget to keep your comments pouring in. They're all very much appreciated as always. Don't forget you can message us directly at message@satellitetv.com if there's something you'd like to bring to our attention that you don't want to put in the public domain. But thank you for your ongoing support. Thank you for watching Perspectives for another day. It is a goodbye from me, and it is a goodbye from James.
Goodbye, folks. And just a quick mention that if you Google GoFundMe online, there is a fund for Harshdeep Singh and his family. So you can just Google that and find it on the web.
Absolutely. All support is appreciated. But until next time, we will see you at the next show.